Let's make our first test and run it. Now this brings me to the point where I have to tell you about test-driven development. Now the normal way for us to write our code is to write code, then write the test and make sure the test passes, and then we push to production, right? We are going to be using a different approach, which is test-driven development, meaning rather than writing code and writing test, we're going to write test, then we write code. Now, there is one big advantage of test-driven development out of so many advantages, and that advantage is that it gives us some time to think about our code. How do we want our application to work? How do we want our features to work? And how do we want our code to be organized? Right? That is one of the biggest advantages test-driven development is going to give to you. Sometimes I sit in front of a computer and for a very long time I cannot write any single line of code. Why? Because I'm thinking about how to write my next test. If I don't think about how to write my test, I'm not writing any line of code. And that is one of the greatest advantages test-driven development is going to give to you. There are a lot of advantages, but we're going to be learning them as we go along the way. So how do we use this idea of test-driven development? Let's go ahead and check it out. So in our web.php file, we have this endpoint, which is the home page, and it returns this view. Let's just say our client wants an about page, and when you visit the about page, you just see a big about page on the view. Let's go ahead and create a test, and this is going to be a feature test, right? Because we don't care about how it's connected to controllers or if it's using closures, but we just want an about page, and that about page should display about me on the view. So let's go ahead and create a test, and obviously Laravel, as awesome as it is, has a helper for this. So php artisan make test, and this test is going to be about page test. Now there are two options we have right here. Either we are creating a unit test or we are creating a feature test. When you're creating a feature test with Laravel, this is the command. But if you're creating a unit test, you just need to pass in unit right here, and it's going to create it in the unit directory. So now that we're interested in a feature test, let's go ahead and run that. The test has been created for us. About page test. Now I'm going to clean up this boilerplate and we're going to take care of it ourselves. How would our test look? First thing about writing test, there are a lot of ways of writing your test for PHP to recognize that they are tests and actually run them, but we're going to go with the simplest. So public function, and it's the way Laravel does it. So if we check in our example test, it starts every test with the test keyword, and then it gives a description of what that test does, and then it does its thing within. So let's go ahead to our about page test and do that. Public function, and we'll just start with test, and then we can write a description about that page. So test can view about page. Now we have this test set up. If we run it, it's not going to actually do anything. So we need to do something, assert something, and then run our test, right? So how do we want this to work? Basically, we want a user to visit a page. So we'd say response equals this, and you visit a page by making a get request, right? And we want a user to visit the about page, and when the user visits the about page, we're gonna say response assert status 200, right? So we want to make sure that when the user visits this route, he actually sees the status of 200, right? So it means he was successful and he saw a reasonable page. So we can also run another assertion, and the assertion we're going to be running is respond assert see about me. So when the user visits this route, we are making sure that he's successful, and we're also making sure that he actually sees this piece of text which is about me. So this is all about our test. This is how we want our application to work. We haven't written any code, but then we have the basic skeleton. So in order for us to run this test, I'm just going to delete this basic test that come with Laravel because we don't need them, and we're going to focus on this one. So let's head over to our terminal and run that test. And you're gonna see this a lot when you're doing test-driven development. You write a test, you know it's gonna fail, but then you still run it. From the errors that you have, you actually make those errors go away and continue doing this till the test passes. Then at that point, you refactor your code to make it better. Okay, so let's run this test and see what we get. And one failure, expected status of 200 but received a 404, and we know a 404 is a not found exception, meaning we didn't actually see the about route. Right now I'm gonna tweak something a little, and that's in my app exceptions handler.php. And what this class does is it actually handles the exceptions in Laravel. Let's look at this render method. So it renders an HTTP exception into an HTTP response, and that's because, for example, if we try to visit the about route now in our browser, we don't receive an exception. We're actually receiving an HTTP response, which is a page telling us the error that was thrown, right? Now, what Laravel does is when any exception is thrown in the application, it picks up that exception and then it tries to render it into a page that is beautiful so we can see it. So what we're going to do here, before Laravel returns an HTTP page, we're going to throw that exception again, right? So we catch the exception that has been thrown, then we throw it again, such that we'll be able to see the exception itself. And this is going to actually cause a little bit of a hassle, because if we refresh now, the page is not working because that exception is thrown and the browser doesn't know what to do with that exception. Now, even though the browser does not know what to do with it, it's actually going to help us in our test, because if we run this now, you can see right here we have a not found HTTP exception, which is helpful rather than saying that we failed to assert a 404 rather than a 202. Okay, so that's how we can actually throw exceptions and see them in our terminal when we are running our test. Okay, so this is simply telling Laravel, don't convert this to an HTTP page just yet. I want to use the exception, so throw it. And that's it, we throw it. So how do we fix a not found HTTP exception? Very simple, we just need to create a route, right? So let's head over to our web.php, and we're gonna create a route which is gonna be a get, and it's gonna go to the /about. Let's just pass in closure right here. I'm gonna run this again, and now we have failed asserting that an empty string contains about me, because this closure does not return anything, therefore it receives an empty string, and then we are failing to assert that it contains about me. If we are receiving this error, it means that we actually passed the first test in our code by returning a status of 200, right? Because we're not returning anything, therefore it just gets a 200, and then we are not seeing about me on the page. Now remember, using our test-driven development approach, let's just return this string about me and see what we get. So we are trying as much as possible to fix this test, and then when we fix the test, if it passes, we're going to try to refactor our code to actually the way we want it to behave. So we have a return about me here. Let's run our test again, and now we are successful. Why? Because we have the about me right here. But then let's head over to our browser, refresh, and we have our about me text right there. Our client now is saying, but wait, I don't want about me as a string. I want a beautiful page with about me in the page and all of that. So how are we gonna do this? This is what we call the refactoring step, right? We want to actually make the code to the final way we want it to work. So how about returning a view? So let's go ahead and return a view rather than returning about me, and we're gonna return the about view. So our about view doesn't exist, but after every single refactor, the best way to do is actually run your test to know what is breaking and what you've done. So right here we have the view about not found, and we can fix that error by simply heading over to our resources directory, views, and then creating that new view. So I'm just going to call this about.blade.php. Now we have that view. Let's go ahead and run our test again. And then we have failed asserting that an empty string contains about me. Obviously the view is empty, right? So if we head over to our browser, it's empty. So what we're going to do is actually just write about me in the view and save. Run our test again, and we have a passing test again, right? We return, we refresh, and then we still have about me, which means our test is passing. But then we don't still want this, right? We want a beautiful view, and we make sure that this test is in it. So I'm just gonna copy everything in my welcome.blade.php, paste it right there, and I'm just gonna remove all of these links. We don't need them. And if we run a test right now, we're gonna fail to assert that all of this HTML in the page contains about me. That's what we have at the top, failed asserting that all of the HTML contains about me. So somewhere, somehow in our code, we have to echo out about me for this test to pass. So let's go ahead and echo about me right here. I save, and let's run our test again, and we have our test passing again. And let's refresh our browser, and there we have it. We have our about me. Now it's been a long while to actually write this simple, very basic amount of code, right? So we have a lot of files, created a lot of files, run a lot of tests, asserted a lot of stuff, just because we want to create an about blade.php and put in some about me text in it, right? Yeah, but then it's walked you through the simple steps that we need to take before building a feature in application, right? And it's actually a lot helpful when you build your application in this way, because let's say we want to ship to production and a teammate thinks, about me it's not good enough, let's change this to about us. So when you run your test again, now it fails. So before you push to production, you know it fails, and you know why it fails now, because it tells you that about me text is not included. So you can either choose to now include this feature in your application by simply changing the test to make sure that it says about us, and when you run it, you have a successful test. Or you can tell the teammate, no, we want to stick to about me, so make sure that the test passes the same way it was. So that's a very, very brief example of using test-driven development to actually accomplish stuff. And obviously in day-to-day life, we're going to have more complex stuff to take care of, but this is going to give you a really good footing.